The dinner rush at Carmichael's was in full swing. The clinking of silverware against fine china, mixed with the low hum of conversation and occasional bursts of laughter. Through it all, Ellie Matthews weaved between tables with practiced grace, balancing 3 plates along her arm while dodging the outstretched hand of a gesturing customer. "Excuse me," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "Coming through." Carmichael's wasn't just any restaurant in downtown Chicago. With its crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and menu prices that made most people's eyes widen, it catered to the city's elite. Business people closed deals over perfectly seared steaks, politicians schmoozed potential donors over lobster bisque, and wealthy families celebrated special occasions surrounded by attentive staff and the soft notes from the grand piano in the corner. For Ellie, it was just where she happened to work, her 3rd job this year. She set down the plates at table 12 with practiced precision. "The sea bass with roasted vegetables," she announced, placing the dish in front of a middle-aged woman with a pearl necklace. "The filet mignon, medium rare." This went to a man in a tailored suit who barely looked up from his phone. "And the truffle risotto." The last plate went to a younger woman who actually smiled at Ellie, a rare occurrence in her experience at Carmichael's. "Can I get you anything else?" Ellie asked, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "We're fine for now," the man mumbled, still not looking up. Ellie nodded and moved on to her next table. Her feet were already aching, and she was only 3 hours into her double shift. But she couldn't complain, not when rent was due in 6 days and her bank account was looking alarmingly empty. In the kitchen, chaos reigned. The head chef, Anton, barked orders in his thick Russian accent while line cooks scurried to keep up with the Friday night demand. "Order up for table 20, Anton shouted. "Where is front staff?" "Food gets cold!" Ellie grabbed the plates. "I've got it," she said, even though table 20 wasn't one of hers. Maggie, who usually worked that section, was on break, and Ellie knew that cold food meant unhappy customers, which meant smaller tips. And tonight, she needed every dollar she could get. As she pushed through the swinging doors back into the dining room, Ellie glanced at the clock. 6 more hours to go. Her shoulders slumped slightly before she forced them back up. She'd gotten through worse. Much worse. She delivered the food to table 20, a family celebrating what appeared to be a graduation based on the "Congrats Grad" gift bag at the foot of the table. Then she made her rounds, refilling water glasses and checking on her tables before returning to the wait station to enter new orders into the system. "How's Section 3 holding up?" asked Raj, one of the more experienced waiters who had taken Ellie under his wing when she started 3 months ago. "The usual," Ellie replied, tapping the touch screen with more force than necessary. "Table 14 keeps running me ragged with special requests, and 16 hasn't even looked at their menus yet, even though they've been here for 20 minutes. Raj chuckled. "And let me guess, Table 8 is the corporate crowd who thinks their business deal makes them owners of the place." Ellie's grimace was all the confirmation he needed. "Table 8 is always the corporate crowd," Raj said with a knowing nod. "Different faces, same attitude. Just smile, keep their glasses full, and remember that their American Express cards are about to make your rent payment." "If they tip," Ellie muttered. "Oh, they'll tip," Raj assured her. "They're trying to impress each other too much not to. Trust me." A commotion from the front of the restaurant caught their attention. The maitre d' was welcoming a new group, 6 men in expensive suits, already loud and boisterous. Ellie's heart sank as the maitre d' led them to table 18, right in the middle of her section. "Looks like you've got the Wilton Capital guys," Raj whispered. "Word is they just closed a huge deal. 20 million or something?" "Great," Ellie said, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. "That's great." She took a deep breath and approached the table with menus in hand. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Carmichael's. Can I start you with some drinks?" One man, clearly the leader of the group with his silver-streaked hair and confident demeanor, looked up at her with barely concealed impatience. "Yes, we'll need 2 bottles of your Dom Perignon to start." "Excellent choice," Ellie said. "Any appetizers while you look over the menu?" "Bring us one of everything from the appetizer section," another man said dismissively. "We're celebrating." Ellie nodded, jotting down notes even though the order was simple enough to remember. She'd learned that customers like these preferred seeing her write things down. It made them feel important. "I'll get those drinks right away," she said before hurrying off. Back at the wait station, she entered the order, and then leaned against the wall for just a moment, closing her eyes. The champagne order alone would come to over $600. The appetizers would add another $300 or so. This could be the break she needed. A good tip from this table might just cover the rest of her rent. "You okay?" Raj asked, appearing beside her with an empty tray. "Yeah," Ellie said, straightening up. "Just calculating how many hours of sleep I can squeeze in between this shift and my morning shift at the coffee shop." "The glamorous life," Raj said with a sympathetic smile. "How's the music school thing going?" Ellie's face clouded. "On hold again," she gestured vaguely. "Can't exactly afford tuition when I'm barely making rent." She didn't add that her battered upright piano, the one she'd saved for years to buy, was gathering dust in her tiny apartment. She hadn't touched it in weeks, maybe months. Between her 3 jobs and constant exhaustion, finding time to play seemed impossible. And each day that passed, her dream of finishing her performance degree at the conservatory felt more and more distant. The sommelier appeared with the champagne for table 18, and Ellie followed him back to the table with a professional smile fixed firmly in place. The men were even louder now, laughing at some inside joke. As the sommelier presented and opened the bottles with practiced flourish, Ellie began setting out champagne flutes. "So," said the silver-haired man, turning his attention to her, "how long have you worked here, sweetheart?" Ellie maintained her smile despite the condescending tone. "About 3 months, sir. Career waitress, huh?" Another man chimed in, not unkindly but with the oblivious privilege of someone who had never had to worry about making rent. "Actually," Ellie began, then stopped herself. These men didn't care about her conservatory training or her deferred dreams. "Yes, sir. It's a good job." The men quickly lost interest in her, turning back to their conversation about golf memberships and someone named Harrison, who had apparently been passed over for partner. Ellie retreated to check on her other tables. The family at table 20 was finishing up, the father asking for the check. The couple at table 14 had finally stopped making special requests and were enjoying their meals. Table 16 had finally ordered, after asking Ellie to explain nearly every item on the menu, and so the night continued. Ellie's feet throbbed in her sensible black shoes as she moved from table to table, taking orders, delivering food, clearing plates, and forcing smiles that never quite reached her eyes. The men at table 18 grew rowdier with each passing hour and each bottle of wine. Their voices carried across the restaurant, causing other diners to glance over in annoyance. They ordered extravagantly, the most expensive steaks, the special truffle pasta that wasn't even on the menu, side dishes they barely touched. By the time Ellie brought their desserts, flaming tableside creations that the pastry chef prepared with dramatic flair, she was running purely on autopilot. 16 hours on her feet between the morning coffee shop shift, and now had left her numb with exhaustion. As she set down the last dessert plate, her hand trembled slightly. She'd had nothing but a quick sandwich 12 hours ago, and the rich smells of food all around her were making her lightheaded. "Careful there," one of the men said, raising an eyebrow. "These suits cost more than you probably make in a month." His friends laughed and Ellie forced a smile. "Of course, sir. Can I get you anything else?" "Another round of those whiskeys," the silver-haired man ordered. "The 30-year Macallan." Ellie nodded and turned to go, but another man stopped her. "Hold on, what's your story anyway? Young girl like you in a place like this, you must have bigger dreams than carrying plates around." For a moment, Ellie considered telling them about the conservatory scholarship she'd lost when her mother got sick, about the student loans still hanging over her head despite dropping out, about the piano gathering dust in her apartment. Instead, she gave them the answer they expected. "Just paying the bills, sir. See, Kevin?" one man said to another. "This is why you send your kids to business school, not art school. Otherwise, they end up serving the business school graduates." More laughter. Ellie's cheeks burned, but her smile remained fixed in place. "I'll get those whiskeys right away," she said, turning on her heel. As she walked away, she heard one of them say, "Poor girl. Probably thought she'd be a movie star or something." Ellie's hand tightened around her order pad until her knuckles turned white. In the soft background music from the restaurant's sound system, she recognized Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece she used to play with her eyes closed, feeling every note in her soul. Now it was just background noise in a restaurant where she served $50 steaks to men who thought they knew her story. At the bar, while waiting for the whiskeys, Ellie checked her phone. A text from her roommate. Landlord stopped by. Says rent better be on time this month or we're out. Ellie sighed and slipped the phone back into her pocket. 6 more hours to go and then maybe, just maybe, she could collapse for a few hours before getting up to do it all over again. The bartender slid the tray of expensive whiskeys toward her. Table 18, right? He asked, eyeing the amber liquid. Must be nice to drink my monthly salary in one sitting. Ellie managed a tired laugh. At least they're good tippers. I hope. With careful balance, she lifted the tray and headed back into the dining room, where the piano music continued to play, and the men at table 18 continued to celebrate their success. Blissfully unaware of the dreams gathering dust in the waitress's apartment. Just like her piano, Ellie balanced the tray of expensive whiskey with practiced care. The amber liquid caught the light from the crystal chandeliers as she made her way back to table 18. The businessmen were now louder than ever, their faces flushed from the champagne and wine they'd been drinking all evening. Gentlemen, your 30-year Macallan, she announced, carefully setting each glass down. The silver-haired man, whom the others called Richard, raised his glass. To closing the Henderson deal. 6 months of work and we finally got the old man to sign. To 20 million in commissions, added another, clinking his glass against Richard's. Ellie stood back waiting to see if they needed anything else. Her feet were throbbing, and she longed to sit down for just 5 minutes. The restaurant was still packed, though the early dinner crowd had been replaced by those who preferred to dine later. The soft piano music from the speakers seemed to grow louder in her tired mind, a Chopin nocturne that she used to practice for hours. Will there be anything else? She asked when there was a brief pause in their celebration. Richard looked up at her as if just remembering she was there. Yes, actually. We're going to need some water. My friend Thomas here might have had a bit too much to drink. He gestured to the youngest man at the table, who was swaying slightly in his seat. Right away, sir, Ellie replied, hurrying off to fetch a pitcher of ice water. When she returned, the men were debating something about market shares and quarterly projections. She began pouring water into their empty glasses, starting with Thomas, who did indeed look like he'd had one too many. So anyway, one of the men was saying, my daughter just got accepted to Juilliard, full scholarship for violin. My wife and I couldn't be prouder. That's wonderful, another replied. My son's more the business type, following in the old man's footsteps. He chuckled. Though between us, I think he's more interested in the money than the work. Ellie moved around the table, filling each glass carefully. Her ears perked up at the mention of Juilliard. That had been her dream once before reality and medical bills and student loans had crushed it. Music is a fine hobby, Richard said dismissively, but not much of a career unless you're 1 in a million. Smart of your girl to keep her options open with a proper education, too. Oh, she's the real deal, the proud father insisted. Her teachers say she's got what it takes. Ellie reached for Richard's glass just as he made a sweeping gesture with his hand, knocking into her arm. The pitcher tilted, sending a cascade of ice-cold water directly onto Thomas's lap and expensive suit. What the? Thomas jumped up, nearly toppling his chair. Are you kidding me? I'm so sorry, Ellie gasped, grabbing napkins from the table. Let me help. Don't touch me, Thomas snapped, snatching the napkins from her hand. This suit is worth more than you make in a month. The second time she'd heard that comparison tonight, Ellie felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as heads turned throughout the restaurant. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the restaurant manager, Mr. Phillips, looking over with a frown. I really am sorry, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. It was an accident. An accident? Thomas repeated, dabbing at his soaked pants. Looks more like incompetence to me. Richard leaned back in his chair, eyeing Ellie with amusement. Maybe you should stick to jobs that don't require coordination, he suggested, drawing chuckles from the others. Ellie bit her tongue. These men's tips could make the difference between making rent or not. She couldn't afford to talk back no matter how much she wanted to. I'll get more napkins, she said instead, turning to leave. Hold on, called one of the men she hadn't heard speak much before. He was older than the others, with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. What's your name, young lady? Ellie, she replied cautiously. Well, Ellie, he said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. Might I ask what a young girl like yourself is doing waiting tables in a place like this? College student? For a moment, Ellie considered lying. It would be easier. But something in the man's tone seemed genuinely curious rather than mocking. I was, she admitted. Music performance, piano. But I had to take a break. The table fell silent for a beat, and then Thomas, still standing and dabbing at his pants, let out a short laugh. Piano? Well, that explains the lack of coordination. Guess those lessons didn't pay off, huh? The others laughed, except for the older man with the glasses, who frowned slightly. Richard raised an eyebrow. Music degree? So what exactly was the career plan there? Professional triangle player in the subway? More laughter. Ellie's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the empty water pitcher. I should get those napkins, she said, her voice barely audible over their continued jokes. As she walked away, she heard one of them say, This is what a fine arts degree gets you these days, gentlemen. Remember that when your kids come asking for college money. The laughter that followed seemed to echo throughout the entire restaurant. Ellie felt like every eye was on her, though logically she knew most diners were too absorbed in their own conversations to notice her humiliation. In the kitchen, she set down the pitcher with more force than necessary, earning a look from one of the line cooks. You okay? Raj asked, appearing beside her with a tray of dirty dishes. Fine, Ellie replied tightly. Just table 18 being... Table 18. Raj glanced through the kitchen doors. Ah, the masters of the universe. Don't let them get to you. They're just big wallets attached to big egos. Easier said than done, Ellie muttered, grabbing a stack of cloth napkins. One of them is soaked because Richard knocked into me while I was pouring water. Bet they blamed you, Raj said knowingly. Of course. Ellie sighed. And then they started in on my music background like it's the funniest joke they've ever heard. Raj's expression softened. Look, your shift ends in what, 4 hours? Then you never have to see these jerks again. Until the next table 18 comes along, Ellie replied. She squared her shoulders and pushed back through the kitchen doors, napkins in hand. As she approached the table, she could see Thomas had removed his suit jacket and was still fussing with his pants. Here are some dry napkins, sir, she said, placing them on the table. And I've spoken to the manager. Your entire table's desserts will be complimentary this evening. That seemed to mollify Thomas somewhat. Free stuff always did with these types, even when they could easily afford to pay. Well, I suppose accidents happen, he said grudgingly, though his tone suggested he didn't really believe it was an accident at all. While we're on the subject of your musical aspirations, Richard said, swirling his whiskey, I'm curious. What made you think you could make a living tickling the ivories? Seems like wishful thinking to me. Ellie knew she should just smile, nod, and move on to her other tables. That's what Raj would advise. That's what any sensible person trying to keep their job would do. Instead, she found herself answering honestly. I was good, she said simply. Very good, actually. I had a scholarship to the conservatory. Had, the older man with the glasses asked, seeming genuinely interested. My mom got sick. Cancer. I dropped out to help care for her and work to pay the medical bills. Ellie wasn't sure why she was telling them this. These men didn't care about her struggles. That's unfortunate, the older man said. And for a moment Ellie thought she saw real sympathy in his eyes. But Thomas snorted. Good, everyone thinks they're good. My neighbor's kid thinks he's good at guitar, but he sounds like a cat being strangled. I'm sure Ellie here was the next Mozart, Richard added with a smirk, just temporarily sidelined by, reality. You know what they call a pianist without a girlfriend? Another man chimed in. Homeless. They erupted in laughter again, all except the older man, who was studying Ellie with an unreadable expression. Ellie felt something snap inside her. Not enough to risk her job, but enough to stand her ground. Is there anything else I can get for you, gentlemen? She asked, her voice cool but professional. Or would you prefer a different server for the rest of your evening? That caught them off guard. Richard's eyebrows shot up, and for a moment he seemed unsure how to respond. No, he finally said, waving his hand dismissively. You're doing fine. Just a bit of fun, that's all. Very well, Ellie replied. I'll check back shortly to see if you need anything else. As she turned to walk away, she heard the older man say quietly, Might want to ease up, Richard. The girl's just trying to do her job. Oh, come on, Harold, Richard replied, not bothering to lower his voice. It's not like she can hear us. Besides, someone should tell these kids that the real world doesn't care about their passion or their dreams. Better she learns it from us than wastes another 10 years chasing fairy tales. Ellie pretended not to hear as she checked on her other tables. The family at table 20 had left, replaced by a middle-aged couple celebrating an anniversary. Table 14 was paying their bill. Table 16 was enjoying their desserts. Normal people enjoying a normal night out, not thinking about the waitress as anything other than the person bringing their food, not making her the butt of their jokes. The next hour passed in a blur of dessert orders, coffee refills, and bill payments. Ellie moved through it all on autopilot, her mind 1,000 miles away or perhaps just across the room, where the grand piano sat silent and dark. The restaurant had a regular pianist who played on weekends, adding live music to the already elegant atmosphere. Tonight was Thursday, so the piano remained unplayed, just part of the decor, much like her own piano at home. When she returned to table 18 with their bill, the men were putting on their coats, still talking loudly about their successful deal. "Here you are, sir," she said, placing the leather folder in front of Richard. He glanced at it and slid his credit card inside without even checking the total. "Put a 20% tip on there," he said, handing it back to her, "despite the impromptu shower you gave Thomas." "Thank you, sir," Ellie replied, taking the folder. A 20% tip on a bill this size would indeed help with her rent. She should feel grateful. Instead, she just felt tired, bone tired, in a way that had nothing to do with her aching feet or the hours she'd been awake. As she walked away to process the payment, she heard Richard say, "Maybe we should request a song from our waitress before we go. Something simple like Chopsticks, that's probably more her speed, more laughter." Ellie's grip tightened on the leather folder, but she kept walking, her back straight and her expression neutral. Some battles weren't worth fighting. Some people weren't worth the energy it would take to educate them. But as she ran Richard's card, she couldn't help but think about the piano across the room, about the pieces she used to play, complex Rachmaninoff that made her fingers ache, delicate Debussy that brought tears to her professor's eyes, powerful Beethoven that made her feel alive in a way nothing else ever had. These men would never know that. They would walk out of here thinking they knew her story. A failed musician, a career waitress, someone to be pitied or mocked, and maybe that's all she was now. She returned the folder to Richard with his receipt. "Thank you for dining with us tonight, gentlemen. Have a pleasant evening." The older man, Harold, caught her eye as she turned to go. "You too, young lady, and good luck with everything." There was something in his tone that made her pause. But before she could respond, Mr. Phillips, the manager, appeared at her elbow. "Ellie, could I speak with you for a moment?" he asked, his expression grave. Her heart sank. Was he going to reprimand her for the water incident? Or had one of the men complained about her? As she followed Mr. Phillips toward his small office near the kitchen, she glanced back at table 18. The men were standing now, putting on expensive overcoats, still laughing among themselves. Just another night at Carmichael's. Just another reminder of dreams deferred and a life put on hold. But the night wasn't over yet. And neither was Ellie's story. Ellie followed Mr. Phillips to his small office, her mind racing through all the possible ways this night could get even worse. Would she be fired for spilling water on a customer? For not being apologetic enough? For the slight edge in her voice when she'd asked if they wanted a different server? The office was barely bigger than a closet, wedged between the kitchen and the employee break room. A desk covered in paperwork took up most of the space, with just enough room for 2 chairs squeezed in front of it. "Have a seat," Mr. Phillips said, gesturing to one of the chairs as he settled into his own. Ellie perched on the edge of the seat, hands folded tightly in her lap. "Sir, about what happened with table 18. Mr. Phillips held up a hand to stop her. "That's not why I called you in here." "It's not?" Ellie blinked in surprise. "No." He leaned back in his chair with a sigh, running a hand through his thinning hair, though I did notice there was some tension with those gentlemen. "Everything all right out there?" Ellie hesitated. Complaining about customers, even rude ones, wasn't something servers did to managers. At least not if they wanted to keep their jobs. "Everything's fine," she said carefully. "Just a small accident with the water pitcher." Mr. Phillips nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. Good, good. Look, the reason I called you in here is that we have a situation. Lenny just called." "Lenny?" Ellie repeated, confused. "Our piano player. He called in sick. Food poisoning, apparently." Mr. Phillips grimaced. Bad oysters or something. Anyway, he can't make it in tomorrow night, and Saturday's one of our busiest evenings. We need someone at that piano. Ellie's heart skipped a beat, then immediately slowed. Surely he wasn't suggesting, I've already called our usual backup Arthur, but he's in Milwaukee for his niece's wedding, and the agency can't find anyone on such short notice. Mr. Phillips drummed his fingers on the desk. I'm getting desperate here. I don't understand, Ellie said slowly. What does this have to do with me? Mr. Phillips looked at her as if she were being deliberately obtuse. Raj mentioned you're a piano player. A good one, apparently. Conservatory trained, he said. Ellie shot a mental note of thanks to Raj, and a small note of panic. I was, yes, but I haven't played seriously in almost a year. But you can play, Mr. Phillips pressed. Classical stuff, jazz standards, that sort of thing. Well, yes, but perfect. He sat forward, suddenly energized. I need you to fill in tomorrow night. 5 hours, same as a regular shift, but you'll be at the piano instead of waiting tables. We'll pay you Lenny's rate, which is better than server wages, plus you can put out a tip jar. Ellie's mind whirled. Play the piano in public? After all this time? The very thought made her palms sweat. Mr. Phillips, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think— Please, Ellie. There was genuine desperation in his voice now. The Hendersons are bringing in clients tomorrow night, and they specifically requested a table near the piano. They love the live music. It's one of our selling points on weekends. The Hendersons. Ellie recognized the name. They were regulars who spent lavishly and tipped even more lavishly. If they were unhappy, Mr. Phillips would definitely hear about it. I don't even have anything appropriate to wear, she tried, grasping for excuses. The black dress you servers wear for formal events is fine, he countered. Lenny just wears a suit, but we can be more flexible for a last-minute replacement. Ellie bit her lip. She hadn't touched a piano in months. The calluses on her fingertips had long since softened. Her muscle memory would be rusty at best, but Lenny's rate was nearly double what she made as a server. And a tip jar could bring in even more, especially on a busy Saturday. I don't know, she said, still hesitant. It's been a while. Mr. Phillips studied her for a moment, then his expression softened. Look, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but Raj speaks very highly of your playing. He says you were on scholarship before. Well, before things happened. Things happened was a polite way of saying, before your mom got cancer and your life fell apart. But Ellie appreciated the discretion. I was, she acknowledged, but that feels like a lifetime ago. Riding a bike, Mr. Phillips said with a small smile. You never really forget, right? Ellie wasn't so sure. Piano at the conservatory level wasn't exactly like riding a bike. It was thousands of hours of practice, of muscle memory, of connection between brain and fingers that required constant maintenance. Tell you what, Mr. Phillips said, sensing her continued reluctance. Why don't you try it out tonight? After your shift. The restaurant will be closed. No one around except the cleaning crew. See how it feels. If it's a disaster, no harm done. I'll figure something else out. The offer was tempting. To sit at a real grand piano again. Not the battered upright in her apartment that she'd been too busy and too tired to play. I suppose I could try, she said slowly. Excellent. Mr. Phillips clapped his hands together, relief evident on his face. Finish up your shift, it's slowing down out there anyway, and then the piano is all yours. Ellie nodded, still not entirely convinced this was a good idea. But something inside her, something that had been dormant for too long, flickered with interest at the thought of playing again. I'll try, she repeated more firmly this time, but I'm not making any promises. That's all I can ask, Mr. Phillips said with a grateful smile. Now better get back out there before table 18 causes another scene. Ellie grimaced. I think they're nearly done, thankfully. She rose to leave, but Mr. Phillips stopped her with one more question. By the way, what's your repertoire like? What kind of music do you play? For the first time that evening, Ellie felt a genuine smile cross her face. Everything. Classical mainly. Chopin, Liszt, Rachmaninoff. But also jazz standards, some contemporary pieces. I used to be able to play almost anything after hearing it once or twice. Mr. Phillips' eyebrows rose. Used to be? Like I said, Ellie replied, her smile fading a little. It's been a while. With that, she left the office and returned to the dining room. Her mind now split between her remaining duties and the prospect of sitting at that gleaming grand piano later tonight. The restaurant had indeed quieted down. Several tables were empty now, including, to her relief, table 18. The businessmen had finally left, though not without leaving a mess of napkins, scattered breadcrumbs, and overturned water glasses in their wake. Typical, Ellie thought as she began clearing the table. They probably think it's beneath them to leave things tidy. They gone? Raj asked, appearing beside her with a tray to help clear the dishes. Finally, Ellie sighed, though not without a final joke about my musical aspirations. Jerks, Raj muttered. But hey, they tipped well, right? 20%, Ellie confirmed. So at least there's that. See? Big wallets attached to big egos. Just like I said. Raj grinned. So what did Phillips want? He wasn't mad about the water thing, was he? Ellie shook her head, still a bit dazed by the conversation. No. He wants me to fill in for Lenny tomorrow night. Playing the piano. Raj's face lit up. Seriously? That's perfect. I told him you were amazing. When exactly did you tell him that? Ellie asked, narrowing her eyes. Raj had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. A while back. When you first mentioned you used to play, I might have bragged a bit on your behalf. Raj, what, it's true, isn't it? You said you were on scholarship at one of the best conservatories in the country. That doesn't happen if you're just okay at playing. Ellie couldn't argue with that logic. Still, you could have asked me first. I haven't played seriously in forever. I'm going to be terrible. No, you won't, Raj said with absolute confidence. You'll be brilliant. And it'll pay better than serving, that's for sure. If I don't completely embarrass myself and get fired, Ellie muttered. Never happen, Raj assured her. Phillips is desperate. Lenny's got a devoted following. People come here on weekends just to hear him play while they eat. The restaurant makes a killing those nights. Ellie picked up a stack of plates. Great, no pressure or anything. You'll be fine, Raj insisted. Better than fine. This could be your big break. Ellie rolled her eyes at his enthusiasm. But deep down, a tiny part of her wondered, not about a big break, she was long past such naive dreams, but about whether she could still play the way she used to. Whether that part of her was truly gone or just dormant. The rest of her shift passed quickly. The remaining tables required minimal attention, and by 11 o'clock the last customers were paying their bills. By midnight, the dining room was empty except for the cleaning crew wiping down tables and vacuuming the carpet. Ellie had changed out of her server uniform, into her street clothes, jeans and a simple sweater, and was counting her tips at the wait station when Mr. Phillips approached. All done? He asked. Ellie nodded, tucking the cash into her wallet. Between table 18 and her other tables, she'd made decent money tonight. Not enough to solve all her financial problems, but enough to put a dent in her overdue rent. The piano's all yours, Mr. Phillips said, gesturing to the grand piano in the corner. It gleamed under the dimmed lights, black and imposing. Take as long as you need. I've told Hector and the cleaning crew you'll be here for a bit. Thanks, Ellie said, suddenly nervous. It was just a piano. Just 88 keys, the same as any other piano. Nothing to be intimidated by. And yet, as she approached it, she felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. What if she'd forgotten everything? What if her fingers no longer knew what to do? Mr. Phillips seemed to sense her apprehension. I've got some paperwork to finish up in my office. No rush and no pressure, okay? This is just to see if it might work out. Ellie nodded, grateful for his understanding. I'll just try a few pieces. See how it goes. Perfect. He smiled encouragingly and headed back toward his office, leaving her alone with the piano. Ellie circled it once, running her fingers lightly over the polished surface. It was a Steinway. A beautiful instrument worth more than she'd make in 2 years of waiting tables. She lifted the fallboard, revealing the keys beneath, pristine white and black, waiting for her touch. Slowly she settled onto the bench, adjusting it to the right height. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. What should she play first? Something simple to warm up, or dive right into the deep end? In the end, muscle memory decided for her. Her fingers found the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune, almost without conscious thought. The same piece that had been playing over the restaurant's sound system earlier, when table 18 had been mocking her dreams. The first notes were hesitant, a bit uneven. But as she continued, something inside her began to unlock. Her fingers remembered what to do, finding the right keys, the right pressure, the right timing. The music began to flow, filling the empty restaurant with its gentle, haunting beauty. It wasn't perfect. She could feel the rust in her technique, the lack of precision that would have earned her a stern lecture from her professors. But the soul of the music was there, the emotion, the story it told. And for the first time in months, Ellie felt like herself again. She closed her eyes, letting the music take her, forgetting about the restaurant, about table 18, about overdue rent and double shifts and all the compromises she'd been forced to make. For these few minutes, there was only the music. When the final notes faded away, she opened her eyes to find Hector, the head of the cleaning crew, standing a few feet away, his mop forgotten in his hands. That was beautiful. "Miss," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "You play real good." Ellie felt a flush of pleasure at the simple compliment. "Thank you, Hector. I'm a bit out of practice. Couldn't tell," he assured her. "Sounded perfect to me." From behind her came the sound of applause. Ellie turned to see Mr. Phillips standing in the doorway of his office, a broad smile on his face. "I think we've found our substitute pianist," he declared. "That was lovely, Ellie, truly." The tight knot of anxiety in Ellie's chest began to loosen. "It wasn't terrible?" "Terrible? It was magnificent," Mr. Phillips insisted. "A bit different from Lenny's style. He's more jazz, less classical. But our customers will love it." Ellie turned back to the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. "I'd need to practice more before tomorrow. Work out a proper set list." "Take all the time you need tonight," Mr. Phillips offered. "And you can come in early tomorrow if you want more practice time before your performance." Performance. The word sent a little thrill through Ellie. When was the last time she'd given a real performance? Not a recital for professors, not practice in a studio, but playing for people who were there to enjoy the music. "I think I'll take you up on that," she said softly. "Wonderful." Mr. Phillips clapped his hands together. "So it's settled. You'll play tomorrow night and we'll see how it goes. No pressure, just music, no pressure, just music." If only it were that simple. But as Ellie turned back to the piano and began to play again, a Chopin nocturne this time, more confident than the Debussy, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this unexpected opportunity might lead to something good. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that table 18 hadn't entirely left the building. Harold, the older man with the reading glasses, had gone back in to retrieve the umbrella he'd forgotten at the coat check, and as he waited for the attendant to find it, he heard the first delicate notes of Claire de Lune drifting from the dining room. Curious, he'd peered around the corner to see Ellie at the piano, her face transformed by the music, her hands moving across the keys with a grace and skill that belied her earlier claims of being out of practice. He'd stood there, umbrella forgotten, listening to the entire piece, and as the final notes faded away, he'd slipped out quietly, a thoughtful expression on his face. Tomorrow would be an interesting night at Carmichael's. More interesting than Ellie could possibly imagine. Ellie arrived at Carmichael's 3 hours before her scheduled performance time. Her fingers were sore from practicing all morning on her old upright piano at home. But it was a good kind of sore, the familiar ache of muscles remembering what they were meant to do. The restaurant was quiet at this hour, with only the kitchen staff preparing for the evening and a few servers setting tables. The grand piano waited for her in the corner, bathed in a pool of soft light from the overhead spots. "You're early," Mr. Phillips remarked, emerging from his office with a clipboard in hand, eager to get started. "Nervous," Ellie admitted. "I wanted some time with the piano before people arrive." "It's all yours." He gestured toward the instrument. "The tuner was here this morning, so it should be in perfect condition." Ellie set her bag down beside the piano bench and pulled out a folder of sheet music pieces she'd dug out from the back of her closet last night after leaving the restaurant. Most of it she wouldn't need. The notes were still there in her memory, waiting to be awakened, but it was comforting to have it just in case. "I've put a small sign on the door," Mr. Phillips said, "letting customers know we have a special guest pianist tonight." Ellie's stomach tightened. "You didn't use my name, did you?" No, he assured her. "Just special guest pianist. Why, are you worried about stage fright?" "Something like that," Ellie murmured, though that wasn't entirely it. The truth was, she didn't want to risk any of last night's customers, particularly those from table 18, knowing it was her before they heard her play. It was petty, perhaps. But after their mockery, she wanted the music to speak for itself before they connected it to the waitress they'd ridiculed. "Well, I'll leave you to it," Mr. Phillips said. The dinner service starts at 6. We usually have the piano going from 7 until 11, with breaks whenever you need them. Ellie nodded, already settling onto the bench and arranging her music. I'll be ready. As Mr. Phillips walked away, Ellie placed her hands on the keys and began with simple scales and arpeggios, warming up her fingers. The Steinway responded beautifully to her touch, its rich tone filling the empty restaurant. After 20 minutes of warm-ups, she began working through her planned set list. She started with the pieces she knew best, the Chopin nocturnes, a few Debussy preludes, some Bach that had once been as natural to her as breathing. Her technique was still rusty in places, her fingers occasionally stumbling over passages that had once flowed effortlessly. But with each piece she felt more of herself returning, more of the musician she had been before life intervened. By the time the first customers began to arrive at 6, Ellie had moved from the piano to a small table in the corner. Mr. Phillips had insisted she eat something before her performance, and Raj, who had come in early when he heard she would be playing, had brought her a plate from the kitchen. Chef's special, he said with a wink. Can't have our star pianist performing on an empty stomach. Hardly a star, Ellie replied, though she smiled at his enthusiasm. But thanks for the food. I was too nervous to eat at home. Nervous? Raj scoffed. After what I heard during your practice, you're going to blow them away. Ellie picked at her food, watching as the restaurant slowly filled with well-dressed patrons. Saturday night at Carmichael's was clearly a different crowd from the weekday evenings she usually worked. There were more couples, more special occasion diners, fewer business meetings. The Hendersons are here, Raj noted, nodding toward a middle-aged couple being seated near the piano. They're the ones Mr. Phillips was worried about. Big spenders, always request a table near the piano on weekends. Ellie nodded, studying them surreptitiously. They looked pleasant enough. The woman in an elegant blue dress, the man in a perfectly tailored suit, both smiling as they settled into their chairs. Who are they entertaining tonight? She asked, noting that their table was set for 4. Don't know, Raj replied. But whoever it is, they're important. The Hendersons only bring their most valued clients here. As the clock neared 7, Ellie retreated to the employee restroom to change. She'd brought the black dress that servers wore for formal events, as Mr. Phillips had suggested. It was simple but elegant, perfect for blending into the background while at the piano. Looking at herself in the mirror, Ellie barely recognized the woman staring back at her. It had been so long since she'd dressed for a performance, so long since she'd had a reason to. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember the recitals at the conservatory, the applause, the sense of accomplishment that came from moving an audience with nothing but her fingers on the keys. Then she squared her shoulders, took a deep breath and headed back out to the dining room. Mr. Phillips caught her eye as she emerged and gave her an encouraging nod. The restaurant was nearly full now, the hum of conversation and the clink of silverware creating a backdrop of white noise. No one paid any attention to her as she made her way to the piano. Good. That was how she wanted it. Let them notice the music first, not the musician. Settling onto the bench, Ellie arranged her sheet music, though she doubted she would need it. Then, without any announcement or fanfare, she began to play. She started with something gentle, Debussy's Reverie, a piece that could easily be background music, not demanding attention but rewarding those who chose to listen. Her fingers found the notes with more confidence than during practice, the hours of preparation paying off. A few heads turned as the live music began, but most diners continued their conversations exactly as Ellie had expected. This first set was meant to be unobtrusive, to establish a mood rather than command attention. As she moved from Reverie to a Satie piece, then to a gentle Chopin waltz, Ellie felt herself relaxing into the music. The restaurant, the diners, her anxiety, all of it faded away until there was only the piano and the music flowing from her fingers. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the new arrivals being led to the Hendersons' table. Didn't see the flicker of recognition on Harold's face as he spotted her at the piano. Didn't notice Richard's double take, or Thomas's frown of confusion. It wasn't until she finished her first 45-minute set and looked up to take a small break that she saw them 3 of the men from table 18, now seated with the Hendersons, all staring at her with varying degrees of surprise. Harold, the older man with the reading glasses, who had been somewhat kinder than the others, was smiling slightly, as if confirming something he'd suspected. Richard, the silver-haired leader who had been the most cutting in his remarks, looked stunned, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. And Thomas, the one she'd accidentally spilled water on, was frowning, as if trying to reconcile the waitress from last night with the pianist before him. Ellie felt a moment of panic, followed by a surge of something else, determination perhaps, or pride. She'd played well but cautiously in her first set. Background music, pleasant but not demanding. Now she decided it was time to really play. After a 5-minute break and a sip of water, Ellie returned to the piano. This time, instead of easing into something gentle, she launched directly into Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, one of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire, a work that required not just technical skill but emotional depth and musical understanding. The opening notes, questioning and delicate, silenced the conversations at the tables nearest the piano, and when she reached the main theme, her fingers dancing across the keys with growing confidence and passion, more heads began to turn, the piece built in intensity, moving from gentle lyricism to thundering drama and back again. Ellie poured everything into it. All the frustration of the past months, the humiliation of the previous night, the joy of reconnecting with the music she loved. Her fingers flew across the keys, sure and strong, finding notes and nuances she had feared were lost to her forever. By the time she reached the tumultuous coda, with its cascading notes and final dramatic chords, nearly every conversation in the restaurant had stopped. All eyes were on her, watching in astonishment as the unassuming woman in the black dress coaxed such power and beauty from the piano. The final chord hung in the air for a moment of perfect silence. Then, like a wave breaking, applause erupted throughout the restaurant, spontaneous and genuine, punctuated by exclamations of surprise and appreciation. Ellie looked up, momentarily startled by the response. Her gaze inadvertently met Richard's across the room. The smug confidence was gone from his face, replaced by an expression of frank astonishment. Beside him, Thomas was applauding slowly, his earlier frown transformed into grudging admiration. And Harold was beaming, clapping with genuine enthusiasm. Without giving herself time to think too much about their reactions, Ellie moved directly into her next piece, Liszt's Un Sospiro, another technically demanding work that showcased a pianist's skill. Her confidence growing with each note, she tackled the piece's difficult crossovers and arpeggios with newfound assurance. The room remained hushed, most diners now openly watching her performance rather than focusing on their meals or conversations. At the bar, Raj was grinning from ear to ear, occasionally glancing at Table 18's men to gauge their reactions. Mr. Phillips stood in the doorway of his office, a satisfied smile on his face as he watched his customers' rapt attention. When Ellie finished Un Sospiro, the applause was even more enthusiastic than before. A woman at a nearby table leaned over to her companion and whispered something, gesturing toward Ellie with obvious admiration. For her third piece, Ellie chose Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, darker, more dramatic, showcasing both technical prowess and emotional depth. It was a piece she had performed at her last recital before leaving the conservatory, one that had always drawn strong reactions from audiences. As her fingers attacked the powerful opening chords, she caught a glimpse of Mr. Phillips hurriedly speaking to a waiter, who then moved through the restaurant discreetly informing diners of something. Moments later, a small handwritten sign appeared on the piano. Ellie Matthews, guest pianist. The acknowledgement, seeing her name there, being recognized as a musician rather than just a server, sent a surge of emotion through Ellie that translated directly into her playing. The Rachmaninoff became even more passionate, more alive under her fingers. By the time she finished her second set, there was no pretense that the piano was merely providing background music. This was a performance, and the diners were now an audience as much as they were customers. During her next break, as Ellie sipped water at a small table near the piano, she was approached by the Hendersons. The woman reached out to touch her arm gently. "That was absolutely magnificent, dear," she said warmly. "Leonard is wonderful, of course, but your classical repertoire is simply breathtaking." "Thank you," Ellie replied, somewhat overwhelmed by the praise. "I'm just filling in for tonight." "Well, you've made our evening," Mr. Henderson declared. "Our guests are thoroughly impressed. As are we." As they returned to their table, Ellie saw them speaking animatedly to Harold, Richard, and Thomas. Harold was nodding, glancing occasionally in Ellie's direction. Richard seemed to be asking questions, his earlier shock now replaced by curiosity. Thomas was still watching her, his expression unreadable. For her final set of the evening, Ellie decided to take a risk. Setting aside her classical repertoire, she moved into more contemporary pieces. A jazz arrangement of a popular song, a complex interpretation of a film score, and finally, her own composition. A piece she had been working on before her mother's illness had upended everything. It was this last piece that seemed to affect the room most deeply. There was something raw and honest in the music, something that spoke of loss and perseverance and hope reborn. Ellie lost herself in it completely, forgetting the audience, forgetting her anxiety, forgetting everything except the story she was telling through the notes. When the final chord faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the room erupted in the most enthusiastic applause of the night. Several diners rose to their feet, including Harold and, after a moment's hesitation, Richard. As Ellie stood to acknowledge the applause with a small bow, she saw Mr. Phillips making his way toward her, beaming with pride and satisfaction. "I think," he said quietly, as the applause continued, "we may need to discuss a more permanent arrangement. If you're interested." Before Ellie could respond, she noticed movement at the Hendersons' table. Harold was approaching, followed by Richard and Thomas. The moment of reckoning had arrived. And Ellie found, somewhat to her surprise, that she was ready for it. Harold reached the piano first, his eyes twinkling behind his reading glasses. "Miss Matthews," he said, extending his hand. That was truly extraordinary. Ellie hesitated for just a moment before accepting his handshake. "Thank you, sir." "I had a feeling we might be in for something special tonight," Harold continued. "I happened to hear you practicing last night after we left. Quite by accident, of course. I'd forgotten my umbrella. So that explained the thoughtful look she'd noticed on his face when he'd wished her good luck. He'd already known what she could do." Richard and Thomas hung back slightly, both looking uncomfortable in a way that powerful men rarely did. It was Richard who stepped forward next, clearing his throat. "That was unexpected," he said, his usual confidence noticeably diminished. "You're very talented." "Thank you," Ellie replied, keeping her tone neutral. She wasn't going to make this easy for him. Thomas fidgeted with his cufflink. "I particularly enjoyed the Rachmaninoff," he offered, surprising her with his knowledge of classical music. "The prelude in G minor is a challenging piece." "It is," Ellie agreed, studying him with new interest. Perhaps there was more to these men than she had assumed, just as there had been more to her than they had assumed. An awkward silence fell between them, broken by Harold. "I feel we owe you an apology for last night," he said directly. "Our behavior was inexcusable." Richard shifted uncomfortably but nodded. "We made assumptions that were clearly incorrect." "You were rude," Ellie said quietly but firmly. "Not just incorrect." To her surprise, Richard didn't bristle at the criticism. Instead, he nodded again, more decisively this time. "Yes, we were, and I apologize for that." "As do I," Thomas added, meeting her eyes properly for the first time. "I was particularly unpleasant after the water incident. It was just a suit and it wasn't even your fault." Ellie hadn't expected actual contrition from these men. She'd imagined this confrontation many times during her performance. Their shock, their embarrassment, perhaps some grudging acknowledgement of her talent, but not genuine apologies. "Thank you," she said simply. "I appreciate that." Harold glanced back at their table where the Hendersons were watching with interest. "We should return to our clients," he said. "But I wanted to ask, that final piece, the contemporary one. I didn't recognize it. Who was the composer?" Ellie felt a flush of pride. "I was. It's something I've been working on for a while." All three men looked genuinely impressed. "You compose as well?" Harold asked. "Remarkable. Would you consider sharing the sheet music?" Thomas asked unexpectedly. "My daughter is studying piano at Oberlin. She's always looking for new contemporary pieces." "Your daughter's a pianist?" Ellie couldn't hide her surprise. Thomas smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his previously stern face. "Yes, and not a very practical career choice, as I'm constantly reminding her." He had the grace to look sheepish at this admission, though perhaps I'll be a bit less insistent about that after tonight. "I'd be happy to share the music with her." Ellie said, warming slightly to the man who had been so dismissive of her just 24 hours earlier. Excellent. Harold clapped his hands together. Now, gentlemen, we really must return to the Hendersons. As they turned to go, Richard hesitated, then turned back. Miss Matthews, Ellie, may I ask a personal question? Ellie nodded cautiously. Why are you waiting tables when you can play like that? Surely there are better opportunities for someone with your talent. It was the question she'd been asking herself for months, though with less judgment and more despair than Richard's tone suggested. Life happens, she said simply. My mother got sick. I had to leave school to care for her and help with medical bills. By the time Ellie paused, still finding it difficult to say the words aloud. By the time she passed away, I was deep in debt and had lost my scholarship. This job pays the bills. Understanding dawned in Richard's eyes. I see. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, Ellie replied. Richard seemed about to say something else, but Harold touched his arm. The Hendersons, he reminded him gently. With final nods of acknowledgement, the three men returned to their table. Ellie watched them go, feeling strangely empty. The confrontation she'd anticipated throughout her performance had come and gone, leaving her uncertain what to feel. Everything okay? Mr. Phillips asked, appearing at her side. Yes, Ellie said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Just unexpected. Well, whatever they said, the rest of the restaurant is absolutely enamored with your playing, Mr. Phillips assured her. I've had 3 different tables ask if you'll be performing regularly. Really? Really? He beamed at her. As I was saying before we were interrupted, I'd like to discuss a more permanent arrangement. Leonard's getting older and he's been wanting to cut back to just Friday nights. We could use someone for Saturdays, maybe even add a Thursday. Ellie's mind raced. Playing regularly would mean steady income, likely more than she made waiting tables, especially with tips. And it would mean keeping music in her life, using the skills she'd spent years developing. I'd like that, she said softly. I'd like that very much. Wonderful. Mr. Phillips clapped his hands together. We'll work out the details tomorrow. For now, you've got about 20 minutes left in your set if you're up for it. Ellie nodded, already turning back to the piano. I am. As she settled onto the bench again, she noticed Raj giving her an enthusiastic thumbs up from across the room. She smiled in return, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. For her final 20 minutes, Ellie played from the heart, a mix of classical pieces and jazz standards that showcased her range and versatility. The restaurant remained hushed, diners lingering over coffee and dessert rather than rushing off, captivated by the music. When she finally played the last notes of her set, the gentle closing bars of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Several diners approached the piano to compliment her personally, and Ellie found herself blushing under their praise. As the restaurant began to empty, she noticed that the Hendersons and their guests were among the last to leave. On their way out, Mrs. Henderson stopped to press something into Ellie's hand. A business card. My husband sits on the board of the Symphony Foundation, she explained. They're always looking for new talent for their community outreach programs. Teaching, performing, that sort of thing. Call me next week and we'll set up a proper meeting. Stunned, Ellie thanked her, carefully tucking the card into her dress pocket. As the Hendersons moved toward the door, Harold, Richard, and Thomas each nodded to her in turn. Harold with a warm smile, Richard with newfound respect, and Thomas with a look that seemed almost apologetic. Once they were gone, Ellie sat alone at the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. The restaurant was nearly empty now, just a few stragglers finishing their meals and the staff beginning to clean up. Some night, huh? Raj said, pulling up a chair beside the piano. Told you you'd be brilliant. Ellie smiled tiredly. You did, though I'm not sure I believed you. Well, believe it now. You were amazing. He nodded toward her pocket. What did Mrs. Henderson give you? Ellie showed him the business card. Apparently her husband is on the board of the Symphony Foundation. She wants me to call about some community programs. Raj's eyes widened. Seriously? That's huge, Ellie. The Symphony Foundation funds all sorts of music education and performance opportunities. They've got connections everywhere. I know, Ellie said softly, the reality of what had just happened finally beginning to sink in. I can't quite believe it. Believe it, Mr. Phillips said, joining them with a bottle of champagne and 3 glasses. You earned it with that performance tonight. I've been running this place for 15 years, and I've never seen a crowd react like that to the piano music." He poured the champagne and handed glasses to Ellie and Raj. "To our new pianist," he toasted, raising his glass. "And to whatever comes next." Ellie clinked her glass against theirs, feeling a surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. Just 24 hours ago, she had been a waitress being mocked by wealthy businessmen, her dreams of a music career seeming more distant than ever. "And now, what are you thinking?" Raj asked, noticing her sudden introspection. Ellie took a sip of champagne before answering. "I'm thinking about how quickly things can change. For better or worse. Well, this is definitely for the better," Mr. Phillips declared. "Now you two enjoy your champagne. I've got to finish up some paperwork, but Ellie, let's talk tomorrow about your schedule going forward." As he walked away, Raj raised his glass again. "To table 18, he said with a grin. "May they forever regret underestimating you." Ellie laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Actually, I should probably thank them. In a weird way, they're partly responsible for tonight. How do you figure that? If they hadn't been so awful, I might not have been so determined to prove myself at the piano. And if Richard hadn't knocked into my arm with the water pitcher, Mr. Phillips might never have called me into his office, and I might never have heard about Lenny being sick." She shook her head, marveling at the strange twists of fate. "It's funny how life works sometimes." "Well, whatever the reason, I'm glad it happened," Raj said sincerely. "It's good to see you happy again. And playing. You light up when you play, you know that?" Ellie hadn't known that, but she could feel the truth of it. Something had awakened in her tonight. Something she had feared was gone forever. After finishing their champagne, Raj helped her gather her sheet music and walked her to her car. The night air was cool and clear, the city lights reflecting off puddles from an earlier rain shower. "So," Raj said as they reached her battered old Honda, "will you still talk to us lowly servers once you're a famous pianist?" Ellie laughed, punching his arm lightly. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm hardly going to become famous overnight." "Maybe not overnight," Raj conceded, "but you've got the talent, and now you've got connections. The Hendersons know everyone in the city's art scene." Ellie shook her head, unwilling to let her hopes rise too high too quickly. "Let's take it one step at a time. For now, I'm just happy to be playing again. The rest? We'll see." As she drove home that night, her mind was still buzzing with the events of the evening. The music, the applause, the look of astonishment on Richard's face, the business card from Mrs. Henderson, the job offer from Mr. Phillips. For the first time in a very long time, Ellie felt a sense of possibility unfolding before her. Not the naive dreams of her youth, but something more grounded, more resilient. A second chance, perhaps. When she reached her apartment, instead of collapsing into bed as she'd expected to do after such an exhausting day, she found herself drawn to the old upright piano in the corner of her living room. Sitting down, she ran her hands lovingly over the keys that had been neglected for too long. Then, despite the late hour and her tired fingers, she began to play, softly so as not to disturb her neighbors, but with all the joy and passion that had been reawakened in her heart. Life had knocked her down, but music, her music, had helped her rise again, and this time she wouldn't let it go.